So apparently Gen Z is just too lazy to work, and to solve this issue, a bunch of companies are now trying to modernize the workplace based on, what the kids are up to nowadays. But, when you start prioritizing being hip over just giving people a reasonable means of compensation and a reasonable work-life balance, you start making room for exploitation. Let's talk about it. Deformalizing the workplace is seen as the easiest way for companies to incentivize employees to stay with the company, especially younger employees, whether it be for their work family or our amazing company culture that is used to incentivize employees now. And in a previous video, I spoke about how young people are struggling in the job market right now. They are really struggling to find job opportunities. So when an opportunity comes along, they are just happy to find a job. And so they will just take any salary that comes their way. And day by day, we are starting to see more companies take advantage of this, take advantage of the oversaturated job market. And so they know that they are not willing to incentivize employees monetarily. And so they use company culture and being hip and trying to appeal to a younger workforce as an incentive to have employees stay. But this deformalization and this attempt at being relatable to a younger audience is not just restricted to the confines of the workplace, okay? Because we see it online, on the internet. Social media brand management teams, whether it's commenting on random posts or being part of meme trends, they are trying to appeal to a younger audience on the internet, but not in an attempt at being genuine. It is instead an attempt at increasing profit, because that's what these social media marketing teams are there for. As someone who comes from a social media marketing background and a digital marketing background, I've seen the behind the scenes of what goes down in marketing teams for these types of companies. It's not quirky, it's strategic, because those content ideas have to pass through a clump different chains throughout the organization before it gets posted. But we've seen this memifying phenomenon quite recently actually here in South Africa with the whole "kyk wat doen 'n blazer" meme, which every single company under the sun has hopped on at this point.
Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk wat doen die blazer. Hy steek alles weg. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie. Kyk gou wat doen 'n blazer. Kyk wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Kyk dit gou wat doen 'n blazer. Okay. Hierdie is, kyk dit gou, met 'n lekker goue takkie.
Okay, before you get mad, the reason why I just layered all of them like one after the other is so that you can get as annoyed as what I did seeing it just everywhere on the internet. Because, you can only look at it so many times before you start losing your mind. And every single time you see it, it's not funny anymore. It's stale. I don't want to see it anymore. And yet companies just keep on going. So I just had to demonstrate that for you. You're welcome. But that's the problem, right? You have a lot of marketing teams and digital marketing agencies that are popping up every other day that are attacking the same trends. And these funny videos, these lighthearted moments aren't getting overused by the average Joe. It is these companies that are just banding together and just swarming to the same things that it eventually doesn't feel lighthearted anymore. These informal discourses, funny videos, memes, funny pictures that you see on the internet, they were supposed to be a breakaway from work, something that you wake up to in the morning while you're busy waking up, you got your cup of coffee, you're busy scrolling on your For You page, and you're just getting ready for a day of work, but you don't want to think about work yet. And unfortunately, with companies now increasingly workifying the internet, this whole work-life balance, the lines get blurred completely. But the absence of a work-life balance in 2026 is not just obviously confined to social media, because it is the lived experience of almost every single working South African, regardless of whether you're someone under the age of 30 or you've been working for the past 30 years. In 2022, a study was published between researchers at UNISA and also at the Lepane State University in Zimbabwe that seek to understand the impact of work stress and a work-life balance on the commitment and productivity of employees in under-resourced organizations. And shocker, the study found that there was a positive correlation between having a work-life balance and employee commitment, meaning that with an increase in a work-life balance, employees essentially became more committed and focused in their work. Genade, color me shocked. But all in all, if this is the case, if employees become more productive and more committed in their work when they do have a work-life balance, why is a work-life balance or the concept of it completely disappearing from the working world? Well, just last month, a sponsored Daily Maverick article was written to advertise the rentable workspace company, Workshop 17. The business has 16 locations that essentially provide, according to them, people-centered workspaces. In the Daily Maverick article, it speaks about the shadow tax that business owners have to pay to keep a work building operational alongside everything else that they have to pay for. It talks about how Workshop 17 solves this issue by providing a comfortable workspace that Gen Z in particular can use. The article directly targets Gen Z because the youth, as they put it, is quietly exiting the traditional management track. Well, yes, they are right that Gen Z, my generation, are more susceptible to wanting to work from home, to engage in hybrid or even remote positions. It's more so us that resort to freelancing work. But what they are also not mentioning is that the majority of freelancers who are of the Gen Z demographic take on these side hustles and take on these private contractor positions because they have to. They still have a normal full-time 8-to-5 job, but that 8-to-5 job doesn't pay them enough to live. And so they have to take on additional work, additional opportunities on their own to at least make a decent enough income for them to make it to the end of the month. And unfortunately, now we have a lot of young people that now have an 8-to-5 job, have to take on additional roles after hours, on top of doing unpaid overtime work for, company number one. They do not have any time for themselves or for their families. Or my generation, we starting to get married, we starting to plan for the future. We don't have the time to spend with our partners, with our families. And so this is really calling into question, the work-life balance, is it disappearing or not? The verdict comes in and, is 100% disappearing. But now, if we have to take that and we have to go back to the Daily Maverick article, we start to realize that using these types of facilities comes at quite a price, which most small businesses and SMEs, they can't afford it. If we look at Workshop 17, for example, renting a desk is almost 300 Rand a day. And the monthly memberships range between 2,280 to over 5 grand. Now, you might be wondering, Michaela, why are you mentioning this? Because this is not the first time that the Daily Maverick has published a sponsored article for Workshop 17. Because they published one back in 2023. This article essentially dived into how, quote-unquote, authentic workspaces is essentially more important than having a work-life balance. And again, look at the article. It is sponsored by who? Workshop 17. So according to this article, it states that it's the flexibility of time and how work and private tasks fit together that allows us to manage what's important and live fuller lives. This article completely misses the point of what a work-life balance is. It's not being able to work from anywhere, because at the end of the day, you're still working. The definition of a work-life balance considers the fact that there is a difference between working and having a life outside of work. Not being able to blur the lines of the two together, that is not what a work-life balance is. Now, I was thinking, why is it so difficult to find articles by a lot of mainstream sources, Daily Maverick, News 24, Newsroom Africa, ENCA, articles and even video content that surrounds concerns regarding the work-life balance? And then I started realizing mainstream media outlets like Daily Maverick have already been paid in the past to write several articles promoting this type of content. So if they were to come out voicing concerns around a real work-life balance happening in South Africa, and if they were to conduct surveys or conduct investigations, they would essentially be backtracking on every other article they have previously come out with. And if they have to backtrack and admit that, they were not being completely transparent about what was happening, that wouldn't be a very good look. Now, this is not an incitement of hate to companies like Workshop 17, because the concept at its core is actually a very, very good idea. As someone who is a small business owner who works for, myself, I founded the Youth Boost Initiative, and I'm also an independent journalist. I think this idea has a lot of potential. But when we look at the mixed messaging and how people's work burnout is being profited from, it does end up leaving a bad taste in someone's mouth. Right now in South Africa, unlike the case overseas, is that a lot of Gen Z are terrified of the interview process because they send in their applications and then they go through 30 million rounds of interviews just for the potential opportunity of landing the job. And so because they know that the job market is so oversaturated, they are too scared to negotiate. Even when they have ample experience, ample qualifications, and they are perfect for the position, they know there are 100 bajillion other people that are also being interviewed. And so when it comes to negotiating your compensation, your salary, your benefits, they are hesitant to do so.
Guys, it's moments like this that show me and make me realize that the LO curriculum was useless. I just got a job offer, and the amount that they are willing to give me is great. I just know that I would like more and that I deserve more. So I responded to the email, shaking, kitatazela, like shivering, because I'm just so terrified of asking for my worth. And it's just like, why? Why are we not trained to be able to say, actually, I would like a little bit more based off, and I was able to justify it, like based off the scope of work, market standards, what's expected of me, my experience, the duration of the contract, like I feel I would like X amount. So is there wiggle room to move to the amount that I want? I closed the email app, I switched off my phone, and only now I'm switching it back on to record this TikTok because I'm scared. Why am I so scared to ask for what I deserve? Oh my gosh, guys, I'm back with an update. I recently posted a video about a job offer that I got where they were offering me less money than I thought I was worth. So I nervously, shakenly, if that even is a word, typed up the email asking for more money, and I was able to justify it based off the scope of work, market standard, my experience, and so forth. And they responded in a very positive way. So I didn't get the amount that I wanted, but we were able to meet in the middle. And I think that's so important when it comes to the process of negotiation.
Now, this experience that this young woman went through, I think is very indicative of the fact that companies are able to compensate you, are able to provide you with a suitable salary. They just lowball you first because they know 9 times out of 10, people are not willing to negotiate because they are scared of the alternative of not getting the job. I'm starting to realize that company bosses, higher up managers, CEOs, they know how bad their compensation is for their employees. They know, okay? But I don't think they know how bad it really is. But young people and Gen Z overseas in other countries are starting to actually realize this and are starting to put very hard boundaries. But unfortunately in South Africa, Our generation is a little bit slower to adapt to this because they are still under this traditional assumption that if you just work hard, you will be rewarded for it. But there is a subset of Gen Z in South Africa that are starting to catch on. And, they realize that the burnout, it's not worth it. It's really not worth it. How corporate expectations and what is actually good for your own well-being, it doesn't match anymore. Now, I've spoken about my experience in the workforce, and I left the corporate workforce because of extreme micromanaging. I know for a fact who I am, and I know that I am an extreme perfectionist. I know that I am capable. I know that I am confident in my ability, but unfortunately, I had managers who were dead set on micromanaging every little aspect of my life. I could quite literally be instructed to copy and paste an email from my manager that she sent me, and I would just have to send it through exactly like that. And if I did that, there would still be something wrong with it. Now, this is the problem, because this is not just my own experience. It is starting to become an increasingly bigger problem for so many South Africans. And again, companies know that people now in this state of the job market are too hesitant to just quit or resign or put in their 2 weeks notice, because companies know it's going to be a while until they are able to land another job again. Micromanaging has gotten so bad that CISA posted on Facebook warning companies that micromanaging doesn't just hurt the morale of a company, it literally can lead to legal disputes. Now, for those of you who don't know, CISA is the leading South African consultancy when it comes to labor law, especially for small and medium-sized businesses or SMEs. So for them to go out and post on Facebook, specifically targeting micromanagement, it's bad. Now, a lot of people talk about how Gen Z is terrified of working a 40-plus hour work week. But it's not the amount of hours. If it's just 40 hours a week, great, cool. Many people who are older will say, well, we worked 40-plus hour work weeks and it really wasn't a problem. But you also have to understand that we are currently living in a completely different environment work-wise than what was the case 20, 30 years ago. Now, the working world is a lot more fast-paced. And once you're done with something, you have to completely move on to the next thing as soon as possible. Communication is faster. You no longer have to wait for anything to be sent through or faxed through, or now it is just constantly on the go. And micromanaging has become a very, very big problem. And for a lot of the younger workforce, the 40-hour work week is not just 40 hours, because the majority of the time, when you are earning a lower salary, you are not just working 40 hours. You are working a clump overtime that you are not getting compensated for. And do not get me started on performance reviews and performance appraisals, okay? Because you and I both know that by the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, when those scores come through and you sit with your manager and they start going through your scores and you score a lot lower than what you deserve, they do that on purpose because companies believe it will essentially motivate you to keep working harder. Even if you have already gone above and beyond, it is seen as an incentive to motivate you to work harder in the next quarter or the next month going forward. But countless studies have been released that literally shows that having lower scores doesn't incentivize anything. It actually demotivates employees and it leads them to perform even worse in the long term. In this study in particular, they literally shared how the respondents in the survey admitted that these scores were based on subjective judgments rather than objective facts. What this means is that the subjective opinions and subjective benchmarks of the company and the managers overshadowed the objective facts of the achievements of employees. Additionally, a study was released last year that analyzed employees' experience with performance appraisals in the South African Air Force in particular. The study found that many employees that worked at the South African Air Force felt like performance appraisals, or PAs, were biased and not a true reflection of their true performance. At the end of the study, they concluded that the best solutions to address these problems were first to revise the PMS policy at the South African Air Force, and then also to reevaluate affirmative action and career progression policies to avoid further bias. What really breaks my heart is that so many employees, regardless of age demographic, regardless of background, are still being subjected to these types of evaluations because companies choose not to read the research that is out there, especially research in the South African context, which literally shows how demotivating it is. There are even studies that show that because these appraisal scores are so demotivating, they eventually get lower and lower over time because people realize what's the point in trying. And in turn, the demotivation impacts productivity, and productivity in the long term negatively impacts the organization's performance. So if it's not the well-being of employees that is really a concern to companies, they should then think about the negative impact it has on the performance of their organization. Many older South Africans are also starting to see this shift, seeing the shift in overtime expectations, are starting to see the shift in micromanaging and the extent of micromanaging. A lot of older generations are starting to see these problems that didn't exist when they first entered the workforce. The difference is with older generations, they were able to experience a time where these things were not in place yet. They know what it was like without these negative impacts, these negative processes. Gen Z are now entering the workforce for the first time where these are the staple expectations. These are the staple work environments that we have come into immediately upon graduating or immediately upon matriculating. We don't know the alternative. And now we're seeing phenomena like quiet quitting, quiet cracking, and the like. But all in all, we do have a lot of companies that are engaging in these very harmful practices. But we also do have companies that are really trying to address these, especially companies that are being started by Gen Z or younger millennials. But I would love to hear your experiences, regardless of age, regardless of background. I really want to hear your experiences in the modern workforce today, because we've all experienced things in recent years that does not add up to what is being promoted in mainstream media, what is being spoken about in government. And I really want to hear your stories and your perspectives. But for now, I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.